Hello, everyone. There's been a couple of requests for clarification of the prompt for the fourth essay. And so I'm just going to make a quick video, send it out to you, try and explain what I had in mind. Let's look at the prompt. Does the Book of Life concept, as offered in different forms by Hartshorne and Jonas, I should say offer, I'm sorry. Glad you brought to my attention. Bad proofreading. Okay. You see how the sausage is made here. Yes. Does it offer a better alternative to the versions of immortality proposed by Plato and Landsberg? Why or why not? Maybe that does call for some clarification. What I had in mind exactly. That's a big issue. First of all, the Book of Life concept, both, as you know, reading both Hartshorne and Jonas, both of them use this metaphor or idea of the Book of Life. They use it in different ways, but it's obviously a similar idea in both Hartshorne and Landsberg. Hartshorne says that, he defines death as the last page of the last chapter of the book of our lives. The idea that although all experience, all novel sort of experience, new experience ends at death, and we no longer continue some sort of active life of new experiences, that the reality of our lives is permanently recorded, basically in the mind of God. It rests on his fundamental idea that once something is a being of some sort, it can't become nothing. And he has this idea that we still exist in the form of all of our life experiences, all the things not only that we did, but all of our feelings, perceptions, thoughts are permanently recorded and are a permanent part of reality. Jonas has a similar idea, but he focuses more on what we do, that is, our deeds. This is a big Jonas idea that it's in moments of decision, when we have to decide what to do, that we feel that we are in the presence of the eternal, at least when it comes to important decisions, mostly moral decisions, that we feel as if the eyes of God are upon us. And that is a reflection of our notion that our deeds have a significance which transcends the limits of the context in which we're acting, and in some way or another forms a kind of a permanent record of what we did. So his idea of the Book of Life is a little different from Hartshorne's, in that Hartshorne thought that each of us writes our own individual Book of Life, whereas Jonas believes his metaphor is more of a single Book of Life that records all of our deeds, and that is a permanent record, so to speak, of what we did, what all human beings do, both individually and collectively. Those are the basic ideas. The part of the prompt where I say, does this offer a better alternative to Plato and Landsberg? Well, think about how much more ambitious Plato and Landsberg's notions of immortality were. First of all, both Hartshorne and Jonas indicate that they do not believe that there is any further experience after death. That is, that although what we were is a permanent part of reality, we no longer live in the way that we would recognize living to be. And the important thing to keep in mind is no new experiences, no new deeds, no new thoughts, no new perceptions, no new feelings, but a permanent record of what we have done, thought, perceived, felt. Plato and Landsberg would, their notions of immortality were much more ambitious, and insofar as both of them it was really important to them that there is further experience after death. The whole point of Socrates in the Phaedo saying that the philosopher looks forward to death, that philosophy is a kind of a practice in preparation for death, it hinges on the idea that truth and knowledge are to be gained after the soul separates from the body, which is how Plato defines death. This is absolute sort of starting point when it comes to death. So if it were true, as Hartshorne and Jonas both indicate, that there's no further experience after death, and that would all be taken away. So Plato would have to reject that idea, because the possibility of the philosopher gaining true knowledge, now that the soul is separated from the body, now that there's no longer the distractions and the deceptions and the limitations of our finite earthly existence, the soul is now free, that would all go by the wayside. It would have to just, it would just be complete nonsense if Hartshorne and Jonas were right. And although Plato and Landsberg differ in their notions of an afterlife very fundamentally, especially insofar as Landsberg accuses Plato of, well, not accuses him, but claims that Plato, because he did not have the concept of the unique person, a concept of personhood, which Landsberg believes was only revealed by Christianity, that Plato offers a kind of generic or impersonal notion of immortality, whereas Landsberg, of course, believed that the person, the unique individual in his or her individuality, had to survive death in order for the promise of immortality to really mean anything. Although they differed fundamentally on this point, Landsberg, too, would look at the kind of so-called immortality that Hartshorne and Jonas offer as really unsatisfying, because if you remember, the central notion of Landsberg was this idea of hope. And that hope was not just mere survival of death or mere immortality, but a kind of fulfillment and perfection through that survival of death, where the person really becomes what they were meant to be. That too would go by the wayside if Hartshorne and Jonas were right in their conception of immortality as containing no further experiences. So that was the kind of contrast I had in mind, that the Book of Life concept is a much more modest concept of immortality than the ones that Plato and Landsberg offer. Now, I have just, perhaps, in explaining myself, given you reasons to think that Hartshorne and Jonas do not offer a better alternative. But, better is for you to decide. What would constitute better and worse is a matter of judgment, of course, and for you to decide in your paper. But there are some real advantages to the Hartshorne and Jonas conception, the alternative conceptions of Plato and Landsberg. And, one is that it's just maybe more plausible, maybe. That is, to try to establish the immortality of the soul, for instance, in the way that Plato did, is a very tall order. That is, to do what he sets out to do, which is to start with this notion of death as a separation of soul and body, and then to prove that the soul continues to exist in an active form after its separation from the body, is a very difficult, not impossible, I would say, but a very difficult argument to make. And one may also say the same thing about Landsberg, insofar as he did argue for immortality in the experience of death. It's not really clear to what extent he was successful. But again, that's a matter of judgment. So when I ask you in this essay to think of the Book of Life concept, of course, it is different in Hartshorne as opposed to Jonas, but there's enough similarity that we can talk about that Book of Life concept as a single concept. And I'm asking you to contrast it with the versions of immortality, because the Book of Life concept is a version of immortality. It's a conception of in what way we are immortal, in what way we are eternal as existing beings. But it's very different from the version of immortality that Plato offered and the version of immortality that Landsberg offered. And there are these different ways in which, well, one could say that in some ways Plato and Landsberg might be said to have a better conception because it's more satisfying, perhaps. There are some ways in which we could say that Hartshorne and Jonas have a better conception because maybe just because it's more modest and moderate and it doesn't try to prove the kind of really big things that Plato and Landsberg were demanding of this notion of immortality. So I hope that helps. That is exactly what I had in mind. But you're free to answer the question in any way you wish based upon your readings of these four authors. But really, you're looking at the Book of Life concept as it's offered in Hartshorne and Jonas, and you're contrasting it with the alternative versions of immortality in Plato and Landsberg, and you're really basically deciding which one, or whether you think the Book of Life concept is better, whether you think it philosophically is superior. So I hope that helps. I don't know if it did. If you have any further questions about the assignment, please feel free to contact me.